Beneath the vast sands of Nevada, where the desert stretched endlessly under a burning sun, there lay a secret humanity had carried for over a century. Few outside the highest levels of government even knew of its existence. Deep underground, in a cavern so large it looked carved by giants, slept a machine that dwarfed everything mankind had ever built. They called it Ares I, Earth's first and only star destroyer. It was not constructed in recent times, but rather in the forgotten age of humanity's early forays into deep space, when ambition exceeded caution and war was written into every calculation. For decades it had been silent, little more than a relic encased in steel and dust, powered down and entombed as if the world feared waking it. Scientists had studied it, generals had argued over it, politicians had kept it buried, but no one ever truly understood it. To most of Earth it was a myth, a legend whispered in military circles too powerful to be real, that changed on a night when the desert skies burned with lightning yet no storm existed. It began with a hum, so low and deep that the very ground trembled. Sensors buried alongside the Star Destroyer lit up, alarms screaming across control rooms hidden miles away. Ares I was waking. The massive engines that no one had been able to ignite for generations, flickered with an ancient blue fire. Its hull, dark and scarred as if it had already fought battles long before history remembered, shimmered with shields powering to life. The cavern shook as systems once thought dead came alive in unison. Humanity had never touched a single activation code, yet the ship moved as if it remembered something. Lights burned along its frame like angry eyes opening from a long sleep. Dr. Elena Grant, the lead scientist assigned to monitor the relic, stared at her screens in disbelief. For years she had begged for funding, had argued that something slept within the hull, but even she never imagined it would stir on its own. Around her, technicians shouted data streams, but their words blurred. Only one truth mattered. The ship was alive again. News reached the Pentagon in minutes, and from there it spread like wildfire to the world's leaders. Presidents, prime ministers, and generals convened emergency calls. Satellites shifted their eyes toward Nevada. The public was not told, but rumors bled into the underground nets. Conspiracy forums exploded with talk of Earth's hidden weapon. Something ancient had awakened, and the whispers carried faster than any official silence. But Earth was not the only one listening. Across the galaxy, buried in the archives of alien civilizations, humanity's name was often paired with warnings. Long ago, before Earth had been sealed from the stars, records spoke of a war machine built by humans that could shatter entire fleets. The Galactic Council, a body of worlds that considered itself the voice of order, had dismissed these stories as exaggerations. Yet when long-range sensors captured strange pulses from Sol, the records were revisited. The archives confirmed the signature. The Star Destroyer was real, and it had awakened. Panic swept through alien courts. Some species demanded an immediate strike against Earth, others called for negotiations, and still others whispered of abandoning their borders and retreating before humanity's fury returned. Inside the cavern, the air grew heavy as the ship continued to stir. Mason Harlow, a young engineer stationed there for what he thought would be routine maintenance work, felt his chest tighten as he gazed at the colossal hull. He had grown up hearing legends of monsters in space, but nothing had prepared him for the presence of Ares I. Standing before it was like standing at the feet of a god carved from steel and rage. He could feel something beneath the roar of machinery, something almost alive, as if the ship was not merely metal, but a mind, dreaming of war. Its energy reached into him, making him shiver with a sense of recognition. He whispered to himself that the ship was angry, though he could not explain why. He knew by dawn, governments had no choice but to admit the truth to themselves. The Star Destroyer was beyond their control. They could not shut it down, could not even slow the surge of power that rolled through its systems. It had chosen to awaken, and humanity was left scrambling to understand its purpose. Across the galaxy, fleets shifted toward Earth, drawn by both fear and curiosity. The desert sun rose above Nevada, but beneath its sands a new sun burned brighter, one forged by human hands long ago and now awakened by something no one could name. Humanity stood on the edge of discovery or destruction, and Ares 1 loomed. As the deciding hand, its wrath still hidden but its hunger undeniable. This was only the beginning of Earth's reckoning across the galaxy. News of the awakening spread faster than light. Communications relays carried whispers that soon became alarms as the truth reached the heart of the Galactic Council. Within their vast chamber, where thousands of voices once argued about trade and borders, there was only silence when the report was read aloud. The humans had reawakened their ancient warship. The records were clear, old scars written and forgotten. Wars when humans were young and reckless yet already powerful enough to frighten empires. That warship had been listed as destroyed, a relic of a dark age. Yet now it was alive again. The counselors looked at each other with unease, each species recalling the warnings their ancestors had left behind. Ares 1 was never meant to exist again, and if humanity had control of it, the balance of power across the stars could collapse overnight. Fleet admirals of the Grail Confederacy demanded immediate action. They had long feared the return of humanity's hidden strength and called for a preemptive strike to burn Earth before the warship could leave its cradle. The Sarathi Dominion counseled caution, pointing out that a direct attack might only provoke the Star Destroyer into unleashing its wrath. The Vrani Collective argued for secrecy, insisting the information should not be shared with the public, for fear that smaller civilizations would panic and collapse. Yet among the younger races of the galaxy, those who had recently gained their seats in the council, there were murmurs of awe. If the humans could build such a weapon once, what else might they achieve if given time again? Back on Earth, the desert became a fortress overnight. Military convoys rushed into Nevada, helicopters swarming above like insects drawn to fire. The United States had long been the keeper of Ares 1, but now the entire planet demanded a voice. Leaders from Europe, Asia, Africa, and beyond gathered in hurried conferences. Fear clawed at every word spoken. Some argued the ship should be dismantled, destroyed before it caused calamity. Others claimed that doing so might not even be possible, as the ship's own systems resisted tampering. A few voices, quieter but steady, suggested that humanity had been handed a gift, a weapon not of destruction but of deterrence, one that could ensure Earth would never again bow to alien powers. Within the cavern itself, Mason Harlow found himself at the center of events he never asked for. He was only an engineer, yet when he stood before the massive black hull, the ship seemed to stir differently, as if it recognized him. Dr. Elena Grant noticed it too. She urged him to approach, her voice steady, but her hands trembling as she guided him forward. When Mason laid his palm against the cold metal, the cavern filled with light. A deep hum resonated from the walls, not mechanical, but almost like a heartbeat. Systems that had ignored the best scientists for decades responded to his touch. Panels shifted open, holographic displays ignited, and the ship began to project patterns of language no human had seen before. It was not alien, but old human script, archaic yet familiar. Mason could read fragments, words like command and awake, and rightful master flickered before his eyes. The world above erupted with speculation when Dr. Grant's report reached the leaders. If the ship responded to humans, then it truly belonged to them. Yet that brought more danger because the galaxy would never allow Earth to keep such a weapon in peace. Mason himself felt the weight of a destiny he did not want. The ship was not only alive but angry, its systems thrumming with impatience as if it yearned to fight again. He could feel the echo of its fury every time he touched the controls. It was not a machine to him, but a beast held too long in chains. He told Elena this, and though she tried to rationalize it, she could not ignore the evidence. The Star Destroyer had not just awakened, it was watching, waiting for orders, and its nature was not calm or gentle. It was war given form beyond Earth's skies. Alien fleets began to mobilize. Patrol ships moved closer to the Sol system, cloaked, scouts drifting near its edge to watch every pulse of energy coming from Ares 1. Messages intercepted by Earth's intelligence networks revealed a frightening truth. Some factions were already preparing fleets to strike. Others were sending emissaries to demand Earth surrender the ship. Humanity had only just begun to spread its colonies to Mars and the moons, and already it faced the collective fear of an entire galaxy. Ares 1 was both shield and target, a promise of power and a beacon for enemies. As the desert nights grew loud with the hum of the awakened machine, Mason realized that Earth stood at a crossroads. The galaxy believed humanity had reawakened its greatest weapon, but to Mason it felt more like the galaxy had awakened something that could no longer be controlled. Mason barely slept in the days that followed because every hour he felt the hum of Ares 1 growing stronger and louder, as if the ship was no longer content to rest in its cavern and wanted to stretch across the stars once more. Dr. Elena Grant kept him close because out of all the scientists and engineers, he alone could touch the panels without causing system rejection, and he alone could activate dormant consoles that had never yielded to the most skilled programmers before. She believed the ship had chosen him, but Mason did not feel chosen. He felt trapped, like a man standing between a storm and a crowd, trying to hold back winds that could tear apart entire cities. Each time his hand brushed across the ancient control surfaces, more memories poured into his mind. Not his memories, but echoes of the humans who had built the ship long before his time, and their voices were filled with pride and rage. The cavern now bristled with soldiers and guards as the world's governments argued about who truly owned the machine. Some said it belonged to the United States because it had been buried under Nevada. Others claimed it was humanity's collective inheritance and demanded access. Mason watched officials come and go, their arguments echoing off the cavern walls. But Ares 1 paid them no attention. The ship did not react to politicians or generals, it reacted only to him. When he approached the command seat, the lights grew warmer. When he stepped back, the ship fell into a restless silence. Elena recorded everything carefully, noting how the ship seemed bound to his presence, and she warned the officials that forcing anyone else to control it could end in disaster. They ignored her words until one commander insisted on testing her theory. A soldier in full gear was ordered to approach the control seat and place his hand upon it. The moment he did, the ship screamed with a sound like tearing metal, and the soldier was thrown across the cavern wall. He survived, but his arm was broken, and the message was clear. The Star Destroyer did not accept strangers' news of the incident. Leaked despite the tightest security, and panic spread further across the galaxy. The council chambers rang with shouts as ambassadors accused one another of hiding alliances with Earth. Some demanded sanctions, others called for war fleets to surround Sol, and one voice suggested the unthinkable extermination of humanity before the Star Destroyer left its cradle. Fear drove every word because none of them truly understood what the ship was capable of, only that its name had haunted their ancestors. In secret corners, whispers passed between alien warlords who remembered old tales that Ares 1 had once ended an entire star system to crush an enemy. Whether myth or truth, it was enough to terrify them into action. And as Mason sat inside the awakened beast, he began to fear it himself, because the visions it gave him were not peaceful. They were filled with fire and ruin. Elena urged him to tell her what he saw, and though he hesitated, he finally confessed that the ship spoke to him not with words, but with emotions. It burned with anger at being left silent for so long, and it seethed at the memory of enemies that Mason could not even name. The ship wanted to move it, wanted to fight it, wanted to prove its dominance over the galaxy once again. Elena grew pale as she wrote down his words, for if that was true, then humanity had not only uncovered a weapon, but also awakened something with a will of its own. She reminded Mason that if the galaxy believed the ship was angry, then war would come faster than they could prepare. He looked at her with tired eyes and answered that the galaxy already believed it, and maybe the ship's anger was not its own, but humanity's buried deep in its design. When the first alien fleet finally appeared at the edge of the solar system, the world held its breath. The ships did not fire, but their presence was clear enough a blockade to contain Earth and to remind humans they were not free to do as they wished. Mason stood inside the command chamber of Ares 1 as it pulsed brighter than ever before. The cavern shook under its restless power, and he realized the choice was no longer theirs alone. The galaxy had come to test Earth's resolve, and the ship was demanding to answer that challenge. He whispered into the silence that they were not ready yet, but the Star Destroyer pulsed with defiance as if to say readiness was irrelevant. It had waited too long, and the time for judgment was near. The blockade at the edge of the solar system grew larger with each passing day, until Mason could see the outlines of alien cruisers in the projections above the command seat. The ship translated their signals with ease and poured the information into his mind. Hundreds of vessels now surrounded Earth and Mars, their weapons armed, though they had not yet fired. Humanity's leaders pleaded through diplomatic channels for time, but the aliens sent back only ultimatums. Surrender the Star Destroyer or prepare for destruction. Mason listened to the demands as his hands gripped the control panels, and he felt the ship stirring beneath his skin like a predator pacing in a cage. It was not patient. It was not afraid. It wanted to strike. Dr. Elena Grant argued with generals and presidents who visited the cavern every hour. She insisted that any attempt to control the ship through force would end in disaster. Mason was the key, and the ship had bonded to him. The leaders did not like it. They wanted a chain of command they could understand, but the Star Destroyer would not allow it. Mason could feel its irritation every time politicians raised their voices. He realized the ship had a personality, not human, but something born from war and machinery, a spirit that saw hesitation as weakness. When he touched the main console that day, he felt an overwhelming desire to demonstrate power, to shatter the blockade in a single strike, and to remind the galaxy why it had once feared humanity. The first test came without warning. A Grail cruiser drifted too close to the edge of Earth's orbit and fired what they claimed was a warning shot toward the atmosphere. The beam lit the skies and alarms rang across every city. Mason had no time to think because the ship reacted instantly. Energy surged through the cavern walls and a spear of light erupted from the Star Destroyer's weapon bays. It pierced the darkness above and struck the Grail cruiser with terrifying precision. In one instant, the alien vessel existed. In the next, it was gone, vaporized into a cloud of dust and glowing fragments. Silence followed both in the cavern and across the galaxy. The blockade ships pulled back in horror, their captains scrambling to understand what they had just witnessed. Earth had not fired. Ares 1 had fired. The difference was everything. Mason collapsed against the command seat, his heart racing. He had not given the order, yet the ship had acted through him, as if his fear and rage had become its own. Elena rushed to his side, her eyes wide with terror and awe. She whispered that the ship was alive in ways they still did not understand. Mason whispered back that it was angry, angrier than anything he had ever known. The news spread across the solar system within hours, and by the next day, every alien channel in the galaxy carried the footage. A single shot had erased a warship that should have withstood an entire fleet. The council met again, and now the arguments turned to panic. Some demanded immediate annihilation of Earth, while others argued that striking now might awaken even worse power within the ship. Rumors spread of ancient archives that spoke of the Star Destroyer not merely destroying ships, but burning entire stars on Earth. The reaction was divided. Crowds cheered in the streets, believing their planet had been defended by its ancient guardian. Others trembled in fear, knowing that humanity no longer commanded its own destiny but shared it with a weapon that seemed to think and feel. Governments could not decide whether to present the ship as a symbol of defense or hide it away in shame. Mason knew none of it mattered because the ship was no longer hiding. It pulsed brighter every day, its systems unlocking new chambers and new weapons as if preparing for war, whether humanity wanted it or not. He could feel it pushing him, pressing him to accept its full command. He resisted because he feared that once he gave in, he would no longer be Mason Harlow, but something else entirely, a vessel for the ship's will. The aliens were not content to wait. Smaller skirmishes erupted at the edge of the system as scouts tested humanity's defenses. Each time Ares 1 responded with terrifying precision. It never missed. It never hesitated. And each time Mason felt his own strength draining, as if the ship was drawing power from him, as well as from its ancient core. Elena tried to pull him away, but he refused, because he knew the truth. If he left the seat, the ship might lash out, blindly. Only his presence kept it focused. He told her that it was not just a weapon but a judgment, and it was waiting for the moment when the galaxy would force Earth to decide what it truly was. The warship was no longer asleep. It was awake, and it was hungry, and the galaxy was closing in with fear and hatred. Mason could see the path ahead like a storm building across the stars. The time of choices was ending and the time of reckoning was coming. Inside the cavern, the air grew heavier each day, as if the weight of the ship's power pressed down on everyone who entered. Soldiers posted at the entrance whispered about strange dreams and nightmares whenever they drew near the Star Destroyer. Dr. Elena Grant cataloged the reports with a worried face, but she knew the truth was worse than superstition. Ares 1 was changing, and the closer Mason bonded with it, the more alive it seemed. He walked its corridors, now corridors that no team had ever been able to access before. As he stepped forward, the ship unlocked sections that had been sealed for centuries, and inside were chambers glowing with faint blue light and walls etched with symbols that looked more like warnings than instructions. Mason felt like he was walking through the memory of a giant that had once ruled the stars, and every step made him feel smaller and more responsible than before. What troubled him most was the sensation that the ship was not only responding to him but teaching him. Each console, each holographic projection poured knowledge into his mind faster than he could contain it. He began to understand weapons systems that no textbook on Earth had ever described. He saw patterns of energy that hinted not just at ship-to-ship combat, but at devastation on a scale that could erase entire star clusters. The images filled his dreams, and in those dreams he heard voices not alien, but human, ancient human commanders who had once used the ship. Their words echoed with fury and vengeance, and they urged him not to hesitate if the galaxy threatened Earth again. Mason woke from these dreams, sweating and trembling, his heart racing with a mixture of fear and pride. Outside the cavern, the galaxy was already moving. Council fleets patrolled near Jupiter and Saturn, their ships keeping distance from the warship, yet never leaving. Intelligence reached Earth that assassins and infiltrators had been dispatched. Some species believed that if they could kill the human bonded to the ship, they might silence it forever. Others thought destroying him would send the Star Destroyer into chaos. The threat was real enough that soldiers never let Mason out of their sight, and Elena begged him to accept constant protection. He resisted at first, but after the first attempt on his life, when a disguised technician pulled a hidden blade inside the cavern, he finally understood. The assassin failed because the ship itself reacted before any soldier could. The air vibrated with a pulse of energy that threw the intruder back into the wall, with bones snapping from the invisible impact. Mason stood in shock as the intruder lay dying, and he realized the ship had defended him like a beast guarding its chosen rider. The council reacted with greater desperation. Debates turned into shouting matches, and for the first time in generations, alliances fractured. Some species openly accused others of secretly negotiating with Earth, while others pulled fleets back to their home systems, fearing that war with humans would bring ruin to them all. Yet even with these cracks, there were enough powerful voices to push forward a united ultimatum: surrender the ship and dismantle it under council supervision or face extermination. The message reached Earth in words cold and clear. Humanity had only days to respond before the full weight of the galaxy descended upon them. Leaders argued day and night, some pleading for surrender to avoid extinction, others demanding defiance at all costs. Mason was dragged into the conferences, and when he spoke, the room fell silent. He told them the ship would not allow surrender. It had already chosen, and if Earth bent its knee, it would unleash its rage on everyone, friend and foe alike. Elena feared the change in him. She could see how his eyes flickered when the ship spoke through him, and how his voice sometimes carried a tone that was not his own. She begged him to step back to let others share the burden, but Mason shook his head. He told her that Ares 1 was not simply a weapon, it was a judge, and if he abandoned it, the judgment would be swift and merciless. He confessed that sometimes he no longer knew where his thoughts ended and the ship's began. She reached for his hand and whispered that he was still human, that he had to remember that no matter what. Mason gripped her hand tightly and nodded, but in his heart he knew the line was fading. Above the desert, the night sky glowed with strange lights as alien fleets shifted into formation, preparing for war. Mason stood on the command deck, feeling the ship's fury ripple through every panel. He whispered to Elena that the galaxy was afraid, and that fear would make them strike first. She answered that fear might also make them reckless. As the alarms blared across Earth and citizens prepared for the worst, Mason realized the galaxy had already made its choice. The ultimatum was only words. The true decision would come with fire, and Ares 1 waited hungering for that fire, ready to answer in ways that would change the fate of humanity, and every world beyond Sol forever. The ultimatum hung over Earth like a shadow, and every government building from Washington to Beijing trembled with the weight of fear. The Council had given humanity 3 days to decide, but Mason knew the decision had already been made in the silence of the cavern. Ares 1 pulsed with energy more fiercely each hour, as if the ship itself had heard the ultimatum and scoffed at it. Mason stood on the command deck staring into the endless projections that filled the chamber. Fleet positions rotated above him, holograms of alien ships that outnumbered anything Earth had ever built. Even united humanity had nothing that could match the blockade, yet the ship was calm in its fury. Mason could feel its certainty pouring into him. It did not see fleets or numbers, it saw targets. Alina tried to rally the scientists to search for answers in the old archives unlocked by the ship. She believed there might be a way to redirect its power to defend without destroying. But Mason sensed the ship's displeasure at her words. When she pressed him to listen to reason, he admitted that the ship had shown him its true purpose. Ares 1 was never built as a mere weapon of war. It was designed to be a test, a judgment for civilizations that crossed humanity. He explained in a trembling voice that the warship had memories of countless battles, where entire enemy fleets were erased, and even stars collapsed under its wrath. It was not a guardian by nature, it was an executioner. Elena gripped his arm and begged him to resist that purpose, to remember that humanity was not defined by destruction. Mason looked into her eyes, and for a moment he believed her. But then the ship whispered again through the pulse in his veins, and he wondered if it was already too late. The world outside braced for annihilation. Cities prepared bunkers, while ships rushed to evacuate civilians from orbit. Humanity had never felt so small against the might of the galaxy, yet in the heart of the cavern, the Star Destroyer loomed like a titan eager to rise. The soldiers assigned to guard Mason no longer treated him as an ordinary man. They looked at him with a mixture of fear and reverence, as if he were already more machine than human. He felt their stares, but ignored them, because every moment the ship showed him new visions. He saw the alien fleets creeping closer, their captains whispering of victory, and he saw flashes of what would come if he let the ship act freely. Planets burning, stations collapsing, fleets shattered beyond repair. He closed his eyes and begged the ship for another way, but its only answer was the steady beat of war in his mind on. The second night the assassins came again. This time they were no single intruder, but a coordinated strike of cloaked vessels that slipped into Earth's orbit. Before human defenses even noticed the threat, Ares 1 reacted. Mason woke with a start as the ship pulled him into the command chamber. Panels glowed, and the cavern roared with energy. Without his conscious thought, the ship fired beams of light that lanced through the sky. Each assassin vessel was reduced to fragments before alarms even sounded across the bases above. Soldiers rushed into the cavern to find Mason standing before the control seat, his eyes blazing with the reflection of the ship's fury. He whispered to Elena, who had followed him, that the galaxy had given them no choice. The war was already here. The Council declared the act as proof of hostility and mobilized their full strength. Entire armadas shifted course toward Sol. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy prepared for a united war. Yet behind the unity, Mason sensed cracks. The ship fed him intercepted communications fragments of dissent where smaller worlds feared that striking at humanity would unleash more horror than restraint. Still, the great powers pressed on, unwilling to show weakness. Mason turned to Elena and told her that the galaxy thought they were about to face humanity, but in truth, they were about to face Ares 1. She whispered back that he was wrong. The galaxy would face him. He wanted to deny it, but the ship pulsed with agreement. The line between himself and the machine had blurred until even he no longer knew where it ended. On the eve of the final day, Earth's leaders gathered in the cavern, desperate for one last council. Some pleaded again for surrender, others for negotiation, but Mason stepped forward and silenced them with words that were not entirely his own. He told them that surrender would not save them, because the ship would not allow it. He told them that negotiation was weakness because the galaxy had already chosen fear over peace. He declared that Earth would stand not as a victim, but as the hand of judgment. The chamber fell silent, not because they agreed, but because they saw the truth in his eyes. Ares I had awakened, and through Mason it had spoken. The choice was gone. Only reckoning remained. Outside in the cold reaches of space, the alien armadas drew near, and the Star Destroyer thrummed with anticipation, ready to unleash the storm that would decide the fate of every world. The day had come when the galaxy would witness the full might of humanity, and Mason felt the pulse of Ares I through every fiber of his being. The armadas in orbit shimmered like a sea of steel. Countless ships from dozens of worlds aligned as if preparing for a ceremony of death, yet none could fathom the scale of what they were about to face. Mason stood at the command seat, his hands hovering over the controls yet not touching them because the ship did not need him to act, it only needed him to believe. The cavern beneath Earth thrummed with energy, walls vibrating with the resonance of power that had been dormant for decades and now awakened with wrath and precision. Elena stood behind him, her hand brushing against his shoulder, sensing the same tension that had gripped the planet for days, but unlike the world above, she understood what Mason and the ship shared. This was not just a warship, it was the embodiment of human defiance, an apex predator that had slept for centuries and now opened its eyes to the universe. The first signals of attack arrived just after the Galactic Council ordered their fleets to fire, and what followed was not a battle, but a symphony of annihilation. Ares I moved without hesitation, energy beams arcing across space with elegance and precision, striking entire squadrons of alien warships before their weapons could even lock on. Planets that had supplied armies and fleets trembled as they watched satellites and orbital stations vaporize under pulses of power that seemed almost alive. Mason felt every strike as if it coursed through his own blood, yet he did not panic. The ship guided him, showed him patterns of destruction that were as beautiful as they were lethal, and through it he realized that humanity's place in the galaxy was never meant to be humble or submissive. For centuries they had been underestimated, dismissed as fragile and inconsequential. Yet now the universe would remember that the human species was not merely a player, but a reckoning. In the midst of the battle, Mason glimpsed a command vessel, unlike any other, shimmering with alien shields and bristling with energy weapons, the flagship of the Council fleet. Its captain had been hailed as the most brilliant strategist among their kind, yet even he could not comprehend what approached. The ship's sensors relayed to Mason every movement, every attempt at evasion, and in response, the warship pulsed and fired. Each shot a crescendo of destruction that left fragments of worlds and fleets scattered across the void. Mason realized that this was no longer about survival. It was about sending a message, a declaration that humanity was no longer content to hide behind diplomacy or weakness. They were apex predators, and Ares I was the first of their kind to show it openly. Elena watched as the sky above Earth shimmered with the reflections of distant explosions and the light of 1,000 beams tearing through the void, and she understood why Mason had merged with the ship in purpose and thought. It was terrifying and magnificent at once, and yet within the destruction there was a clarity, a moral axis that was unshakable. The aliens had underestimated humans for too long, thought them weak, thought them disposable, and now they paid the price for their hubris. Mason's voice, amplified through the ship, echoed into the void, a silent roar that reached the fleets. They were too late to stop what had already begun, too late to save themselves from the reckoning of a species that refused to be controlled or dismissed. Hours passed like seconds, and when the last of the Council's fleets shattered, when planets that had once boasted invincible defenses now lay in ruins, Mason felt the pulse of the ship slow, a deep satisfaction that was almost human in its relief. The galaxy was silent for a moment, holding its breath in awe and fear, and then across communication channels, whispers began. Humanity was no longer to be ignored. Humanity had awakened, and the universe itself would remember the day Earth's first star destroyer rose from its slumber. Mason looked out at the stars, at the smoke and debris of what had once been arrogant fleets, and he realized that the warship had not only protected Earth, but had rewritten the rules of existence. The galaxy had been shown what it meant to challenge, humanity, and the warning was absolute. Never again would anyone underestimate them. As the light of distant fires reflected across the warship's hull, Mason stepped back from the command seat and felt the ship relax its hold. Ares 1 had spoken, had acted, had awakened the galaxy to humanity's wrath, and now it rested, patient and eternal. Elena touched his arm and whispered that the world was safe for now, that the nightmare had ended, and yet Mason knew the truth. This was only the beginning. Humanity had risen, and with it, the first Star Destroyer had fulfilled its purpose. The universe would never be the same again. He turned toward the cavern exit, the light of countless stars reflecting in his eyes, and knew that Earth had awakened a predator, a force beyond reckoning. And through it, humanity had secured its place among the stars. Mason stood on the bridge of Ares 1 and felt the weight of the galaxy shift beneath him. The silence of the void was deafening, yet alive with the echoes of fleets that had underestimated humanity for too long. The stars themselves seemed to bend and shimmer under the raw presence of the awakened warship beneath his feet. The hum of engines was a heartbeat that resonated through every human soul connected to the vessel, and across Earth, millions watched from space stations and orbital cities. As the sky lit up not with fear but with awe, they had built weapons for protection, yet now they realized they had created a force that could command respect from the cosmos itself. Elena joined Mason and looked across the holographic displays that projected distant galaxies and ruined armadas. She could feel the tension in the air release slowly like a storm finally spent. Yet she also sensed the quiet promise that this was only the beginning. The humans had proven that even the mightiest of civilizations could fall if they misjudged their opponent, and Ares 1 was no longer just a ship. It was a declaration, a warning, and a guardian rolled into one. Mason felt the consciousness of the warship meld with his own understanding, and he knew every pulse of energy, every trajectory of fire, every shield modulation was now a message to the universe that humanity would not bow or flee. They would rise, and they would endure. The council fleets had been shattered, but whispers of resistance lingered in the far reaches of space. They had seen what humans were capable of, and fear had rooted itself deep in their plans. Every world that had once mocked Earth now reevaluated alliances and strategies, knowing that the balance of power had changed forever. Mason turned the ship toward the remnants of a nebula, where scouts reported alien survivors, and felt a thrill of anticipation, not for vengeance, but for the challenge that would come, because humanity had never shied from proving itself in impossible situations, and now the galaxy was the ultimate proving ground. Across the command deck screens showed images of planets untouched and civilizations observing in silence. Mason realized the awakening of Ares 1 had not only defeated enemies but inspired allies. The humans who had doubted their own potential now saw proof that they could shape destiny on a galactic scale, that they could rise above limitations, and that courage combined with ingenuity was a force unmatched by any technology alone. He remembered the engineers, scientists, and pilots who had poured their lives into creating the ship, and he felt their presence within the hull, as if the vessel itself remembered every struggle and every triumph that had led to this awakening. As the hours bled into days, Mason and Elena guided Ares 1 through debris fields and nebula storms, each pulse of the ship resonating with human determination, each beam of light cutting paths through darkness they encountered. Remnants of alien fleets attempting to regroup, but none could withstand the precision and intelligence of a warship fused with the spirit of its creators. Mason knew that the legends of human resilience would spread faster than any weapon had ever reached, and across systems messages traveled through subspace about the species that refused to be defeated. Finally, the warship hovered in orbit above Earth, and Mason gazed down at the blue planet bathed in sunlight and the city lights that shimmered like constellations themselves. He felt a deep calm, because humanity had risen not through destruction alone, but through the courage to challenge the impossible. They had awakened a force that would protect them and assert their place among the stars forever, and the galaxy had witnessed it with awe and fear. Humanity had become a reckoning, a symbol of relentless resolve, and Ares 1 was the herald of that truth. The universe would remember that day as the moment when Earth's First Star Destroyer awoke and the cosmos understood that humans were no longer just survivors. They were conquerors and protectors. The end.